Okay. Welcome to the August meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I call the meeting to order and first turn it over to Jonathan Wang for some housekeeping information. Jonathan? Jonathan?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. We're here in the Natural Resources Building. In the event of evacuation, everyone should remain calm. Take all your belongings and proceed to the nearest exit out of the building. Staff will gather at the evacuation point at 1615 9th Street, and the public is welcome to join us there. And just a note that there will be no food or beverages allowed in the meeting room.
All right, thank you very much. For a brief overview of the public comment process, we will take public comments, written questions and comments during the meeting. Please follow instructions on your screen and on the meeting notice to do that. Now let's do a roll call to establish a quorum. Virginia?
I'm Virginia Dale, and I have no new declarations.
Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
All right, Diane McKnight was not able to attend. Anna?
Anna McCulloch, no new declarations.
And Bob?
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Obi?
Jan Tabetsekar, no new declaration.
And I haven't seen Kenny. If he's somewhere, please speak up. No. All right, Kenny Rose may not be here. Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, no new declarations.
And I am Inge Werner, and I have no new declarations, and we still have a quorum. So today we will discuss current reviews and activities. We will learn about the latest activities of the Delta Science program, and we will hear some reflections from our outgoing Delta ISB members. Are there any public comments right now?
There are none.
All right, so agenda item 2 is the Delta ISB Chair's Report and Business Matters. I'd like to update you on the recruitment of the Delta ISB postdoc. The Delta Stewardship Council's contract with California Sea Grant was executed. It is for the administration of a Delta ISB postdoctoral scholar and honoraria to subject matter experts that support our reviews. It was executed on June 25, so about 2 months ago. So I was a little bit confused what those honoraria involve, and for example, they can be used to support the travel of panelists and presenters to our workshops. So California Sea Grant is now in the process of recruiting a postdoc, and the job posting was made available on the 28th of July. A recruitment flyer is part of your meeting package, and you should have also received it by email. Please circulate to anyone who might be interested in this position. The postdoc can serve up to 3 years, and we are targeting someone with expertise in ecotoxicology or toxicology, ecology, or chemistry to help with the contaminants monitoring review. And of course, other board reviews as needed. The first review of applications will happen on August 27, and we will hopefully have many wonderful applications. We anticipate that the postdoc will start in late 25 or early 26. Next on the agenda is the California Sea Grant State Fellowship. Every year, California Sea Grant State Fellows Program provides a unique educational opportunity for graduate students who are interested in both marine resources and the policy decisions affecting those resources. The program matches highly motivated and qualified graduate students with hosts in municipal, state, and federal agencies in California for a 12-month paid fellowship. The council will be hosting 5 fellowships next year, or 5 fellows. One of them will support the Delta ISB. The matching workshop for the fellows will be on September 8th to 10th, so 3 days. And we have 1 spot reserved for a Delta ISB representative. I will be in Europe and I won't be able to participate. So staff will be checking with ISB members to see who may be able to participate in this. The recruitment process will be led by Dylan Chappell and Jonathan Wang. So 3 people will be on that. We have also been asked for a legislative briefing in August. Stephanie Mitchell, who is a policy consultant in the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee of the California Assembly, has asked that we provide a briefing to legislative staff on the Delta ISB. There's an interest in the Delta ISB's role and reviews. The briefing will occur on August 22nd, and I am very grateful to Lisa Winter to take over the presentation. Thank you, Lisa, for accepting this important task. It's definitely a wonderful thing that we have been asked to do this, and there's an interest in the Delta ISB. Next, I will provide a few updates on our ongoing activities. Subsidence review. Since the departure of Dr. Holzer, staff have been working with Dr. McKnight and Dr. Heikkila to revise the report on the subsidence review to better acknowledge the work that is already being done in the region. The revised update will include a map that documents subsidence reversal projects, rice farming, and flux towers. And a draft report should be released soon for public comment. On the adaptive monitoring manuscript, Margot Matson and other staff are still working with Dr. Dale to turn our recommendations from the 2022 monitoring review on adaptive monitoring into a perspective piece to be submitted to the journal Ecological Indicators. Individual comments from former and current board members are being addressed, and a revised draft should be available soon. So that's that on the ongoing stuff that we will not talk about in more depth today. Since the last meeting, we received no public correspondence. And are there any public comments now, Edmund?
There are none.
All right. For the next agenda item, number 3, for the Delta Lead Scientist report, I'd like to welcome Delta Lead Scientist Dr. Lisamarie Windham-Myers, former chair and member of the ISB, Dr. Steve Brandt, and DSC staff member, Dr. Shoko Shinbrud. Welcome, and we will dedicate quite a bit of time for this because they have a lot to say. So I'll hand over to Lisamarie now.
Thank you so much, Inga. I am going to first start by saying I'm really glad to see you all again, even though it's virtually. The last time I did a quarterly update was in May in Folsom at the alongside the QEMF meeting, the California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum. And a lot has happened since then, and so that's what the things that I'll be highlighting today. The slides, I think, we're going to be advanced by Jonathan, so I think we can get started. Great. So Thank you, Jonathan. In November, I'm going to highlight the updates to the science plan, which is something we're actively working on right now. And so that I'm not talking about, but I will focus on progress on all these other fronts of the science program, including, of course, changes to the Independent Science Board's makeup moving forward. Next slide, please. Great. And so just an outline of today, we're going to start with those appointments and departures. I'm going to highlight the new interagency Delta Carbon team that kicked off in May, late May, the Delta Modeling Collaboratory that kicked off in June, the Delta Summer LiDAR topographic update. We're collecting a new foundational layer of topography for the seamless estuary Bay Delta. The kickoff was in July and collection is to start this week. Fingers crossed. Then the Delta Research Awards, we announced them very formally in July. And so you can see some of those projects and how they align with Independent Science Board recommendations over the years. That's when, after that, we'll bring on our senior environmental scientist, Dr. Shoko Shinbrot, who has a fantastic new paper that's in the open access journal, San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science. And so Shoko will present for about 15 minutes. Then we will move to discussing the State Water Board's Bay Delta plan, which is open for comment right now. And then we will launch from there into a review of the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes science plan review that was led by our collaborative science and peer review unit. And Dr. Stephen Brandt was one of the 3 panelists, and he will be giving a detailed report on what they found in the science plan. And after that, we'll open up for questions. So I think we can move forward. Thank you, Jonathan. All right, well, first, when we take a look at this makeup here, let's just highlight the exceptional board members that we have here, especially those that are staying on. So thank you, Dr. Lisa Wanger, Dr. Diane McKnight, and Dr. Tanya Heikela. We're looking forward to having you on the board for another 5-year term. And then I also especially want to give a warm remarks here for those that we're losing, that are leaving on September 1st, and that is Dr. Virginia Dale and Dr. Robert Nyman, both world leaders in their fields of landscape ecology and river ecology. They have both placed outsized roles in reviewing the Delta Environmental Monitoring Program and highlighting the importance of understanding Delta food webs, things that have been really formative in the way we've moved forward in the science program, and I think the science community as a whole. I'm looking forward to seeing Virginia and Bob in person at the ISB's September 2-day symposium on emerging climate research considerations for the Delta region. And then at that time, we'll also be meeting the 3 new board members. We expect them there as well. And these new board members are equally distinguished in their careers. Let's discuss the new appointees who were approved at the July council meeting. Okay, well, Dr. Peter Goodwin will not be a surprise name to most of you. He served as the president of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and served as the vice chancellor for environmental sustainability for the university, amongst many other leadership positions. He was also the Delta lead scientist for the Delta Stewardship Council from 2012 to 2015. He's an estuarine ecologist and has undertaken numerous modeling studies of estuarine, coastal, and tidal wetland systems, including the Russian River Estuary, Napa Salt Ponds, and Delaware Bay. And I'll say specifically, he brings a hydrodynamics background in estuarine flows that will really, I think, be helpful in many of the reviews that you are likely to see coming in the next 5 years. Okay. Next, we have Dr. Kathleen Jones. She is a senior research scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA. Her research focuses on radar remote sensing, and she has been the lead scientist for many missions relevant to water management, including new satellites like SWOT, the Surface Water and Ocean Topography launch that happened about 2 years ago, and some new data is coming out. I actually highlighted it at the last council meeting. And then NISAR, another synthetic aperture radar product that's going to be useful to the Delta in terms of subsidence and so on. Her work resulted in major geophysical advances, including the demonstration and refinement of the use of remote sensing for measuring land subsidence and more localized surface deformation, including levees and aqueducts. Her work with the California Department of Water Resources was recognized with the Remote Sensing and Drought Science Service Award from DWR in 2015, and with the Kevin J. Neese Award from the Groundwater Resources Association of California in 2019. And then lastly, we have Dr. Steve Lindley, recently retired from 15 years as the director of the National Marine Fisheries Services Southwest Fisheries Science Center's Fisheries Ecology Division in Santa Cruz Laboratory, which is a really long way of saying the research arm of NOAA that works on fisheries that are very relevant to our Delta ecosystem. Dr. Lindley was a member of several biological review teams that synthesized available data to determine the status of salmon and sturgeon populations across the U.S. West Coast, and led a team of diverse experts in the development of quantitative recovery criteria for Central Valley California salmonids. This work resulted in a series of widely cited publications that laid the scientific foundation of salmon conservation under the U.S. Endangered Species Act in California's Central Valley. These three new board members, who I welcome to join in the next meeting in September, they're poised to make immediate and lasting contributions to the overall science enterprise of the Delta. As world leaders in their fields, they elevate and expand the depth and breadth of the ISB, and we're grateful for their willingness to serve our mission during these times of rapid change. I also want to cite that, as you might recall in your own recruitment process, it's a very in-depth, very lengthy period of time by which we explore different packages that are submitted. And we had incredible packages submitted this year, and many of whom we really hope will stay as part of the Delta community and perhaps come back for another recruitment process or serve on other review processes, and or come to the ISB meetings to present on very relevant work that they're doing. So in addition to those new ones, I want to acknowledge again the contributions of our departing members. During her time at the Delta ISB, Dr. Virginia Dale led the Delta ISB review on monitoring and presented to the Stewardship Council in 2022. She was a strong advocate of conceptual models, and many were developed for the Council and Science Program products as a result of her leadership there. Dr. Nyman, a river ecologist, was instrumental in leading the Delta ISB review on food webs, and he presented to the council earlier this year, among other reviews. Bob's been very active. I still hear about Bob's excellent presentation to the council, where he shared a powerful analogy that the food web reveals the physiology of an ecosystem, how it functions and stays healthy, and give a medical analogy and that just like a blood test gives your doctor insight into your overall health, analyzing food webs gives us a window into the inner workings of nature. Dr. Nyman and Dr. Dale are interested in helping to wrap up some loose ends after their term ends, and they both plan to attend the climate symposium. So I'm super happy that we'll be able to see you there and have you engage with that larger community. And I think we'll hear more from Virginia and Bob later in the meeting today, so we can move forward to the next slide. Great. So this is actually a very exciting development. The Delta Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy, particularly Lauren Damon and Sydney Chamberlain, called for an interagency Delta carbon team that folks start working across agencies to start to understand key issues of carbon fluxes and climate adaptation and mitigation across the whole Delta setting. And the Delta Science Program and the planning and performance staff at the Delta Stewardship Council, all of us joined the inaugural Delta Carbon Team meeting that was hosted on May 27th. And since then, we've also had a second meeting in July. And since then, we are starting to form working teams that will be dealing with specific topics. But the key here is that the Independent Science Board subsidence review was foundational. The draft charter cites the ISB subsidence review as an impetus for forming the team. The Delta Carbon team is intended to bring together agency staff, researchers, nonprofits, and other interested parties to collaborate on Delta Carbon issues, particularly those that result from reduced water exchange with land surfaces due to human land use decisions. In particular, there's interest in the drying and oxidation of Delta's highly organic peat soils, which release large amounts of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and cause land subsidence, which itself increases the risks of levee failure and flooding, threatens water supplies, and reduces the viability of agricultural lands. The research is pretty clear worldwide that rewetting peat soils can slow and even reverse subsidence, while also mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. But there's components there of interest in terms of methane release as well as nitrous oxide. And actually, I'm on the right-hand side highlighting this Mayberry subsidence reversal wetland that the Department of Water Resources oversees. That will be a paper, a long-term data dive paper that I'll be reporting on in the August council meeting, where they looked at methane emissions over a series of 14 years, which is the longest record we have right now in the Delta. So the other key points here is that this is relevant to California Natural Resources Agency's climate smart strategy. This is directly relevant to the Delta plan, and there's some focal locations where work is happening and where we're starting to see some opportunities to examine carbon dynamics across a wide range of sites and what can be done to enhance the climate mitigation benefits of that rewetting. The group is likely to form sub-teams very shortly that focus on the greenhouse gas issues, levees issues, agricultural issues, mapping products, and data analysis. And some of those mapping products and data analysis we'll talk about a little bit later. And we can move forward to the next slide. Okay. So speaking about working together in an interagency collaborative way, we finally kicked off the Delta Modeling Collaboratory. The first meeting was on June 12th, and this is for the first phase of the collaboratory. Again, the collaboratory is a fusion of the word collaboration and laboratory. This term is not new to you all who've been working here for quite a while. But the idea is that it's a virtual hub for open science synthesis and modeling to help the Delta science community coordinate and collaborate on socio-environmental management challenges of the Delta. The underlying vision is a networked community of modelers and modeling resources to support complex projects that combine and leverage different models and multiple models. And for now, our vision of the collaboratory is not as a physical place, but rather a support structure that's centered on collaboration and resource sharing. So we've supported the foundations of this first kickoff for collaboratory with supporting a suite of projects that address 3 key Delta management issues that we have also spearheaded within the Delta Stewardship Council, and you have too through the ISB review process. So next slide, please. The 3 areas that we are focusing on are cyanobacterial harmful algal bloom prediction, salinity intrusion and management, and tidal wetlands, food webs, and restoration. Again, they're related to efforts that we've pushed forward through, again, the CHAB's monitoring strategy, through the salinity management workshops of 2023, and the tidal wetlands, food webs prediction, the food webs analyses and suggestions that were made in the ISB's food webs review that came out last fall. And what you'll see is that all 3 of these programs have champions and funding through other mechanisms, but they're working together in parallel to scope a project profile that's focused on for example, near-term goals, things that can be addressed in the short term, things that can be addressed, for example, in later years and soon, and then more moonshot type goals. And so these profiles are really based on looking at what we can do now, but what we could do with more resources and what we can do better by working together, particularly across some of these dimensions where, for example, hydrodynamics plays a big role. Next slide, please. So they're working in parallel right now with monthly meetings. And again, they each have their own goals that they're trying to tackle, but we meet monthly to share how we're approaching those, how each group is approaching those, and see where the synergy can be between them. Next slide, please. We visit that, we think of this as really just the first phase of work. The next phase would be actually doing the work that's proposed in the profiles, but we expect that we will need to gather more resources to make that happen. So we're using this current framing as a way to promote future work in these fields. Next slide, please. This is a timeline of where we are. Again, we've had meetings in June, July, and then in 2 days. Or actually, I'm sorry, it's tomorrow. In August, we have our next monthly meeting, and we're starting to see some profiles being developed along that sort of temporal trajectory I was just describing, near term, far term, and moonshot within these groups, and we'll be sharing those tomorrow and seeing, again, where there might be overlap. We expect that by September, we'll have some general outlines of what might be possible, and we'll start initiating a white paper. October is when we really expect to start to see something more useful and coherent across the groups, because obviously they have their own work to do. And then they also want to share and get feedback from each other. And we expect that at the DPIC meeting, so the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, at that meeting in November, we'll be sharing some of the highlights from across these groups, perhaps inviting the project leads to present at that meeting. And then we expect that by sometime in December or maybe January, we'll have a white paper suggesting how this collaborative approach can move forward into phase 2. And with that, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so here is something that probably all of those projects will benefit from, and that is this new collection that's happening this summer. We had our kickoff meeting in July. This week is the target start date for the actual flight lines to be completed. What you can see here in yellow on the left-hand side is the outline of the full Bay Delta, which we call the San Francisco Estuary overall. And what you can see is that whole area is going to be flown at low tide, or at least below mean sea level, in August and into September. And it will be the first seamless estuary digital elevation model that we've ever had for this region. Typically, what we do is we collect pieces, then we cobble them together into a complete seamless product. But in this case, we're going to have it all collected at the same time. And as you can imagine, excuse me, when the tide is low at the Golden Gate Bridge, it takes 4 hours for that low tide to propagate up to Rio Vista. So, the low tide kind of moves through the system, and so the flight lines can be aligned with tracking low tide. The funding for this was put together from 3 agencies especially, and that would be the Delta Stewardship Council, the Department of Water Resources, and San Francisco Estuary Institute. And they are also using funds that were provided to them through proposition funds. And so these this joint effort was what's making this possible. The other goals here are, this is some of the highest quality retrievals that's known, worldwide. So we've got 12 pulses per meter squared, which basically means we're better than QL1. What we have right now is more like QL2, so maybe a 20 centimeter resolution. This will be better than 10 centimeter resolution, perhaps even better in some cases. And the data will be uploaded and shared publicly through the USGS national map. We have that all arranged to be submitted in January, which is the plan. And there will be multiple additional value-added products that things like slope and aspect and other finer scale things like AI-based coding of buildings and vegetation heights and lots of details like that. But the end goal primarily is this, last return base map for fine scale, literally 1 foot sized pixels at that very fine sub 10 centimeter scale that will be useful moving out into the intertidal zone. So a very useful product for hydrodynamicists or anybody doing hydrodynamic modeling for restoration prioritization and tracking, as well as for planning for flood risk assessment and for other sorts of water movement questions that will happen in the Bay Delta. So that's an exciting project starting right now. Hopefully have more to share on that later. Next slide, please. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, this is another very exciting thing, which is the Delta Research Awards. You may know that we had only about $6 million, but we made very good use of it. These right here, you're looking at the 10 awards. 8 were given by funding that we had, and then we had an additional 2 projects added on that were funded by the state water contractors. And they've all begun now. Their funding contracts were all completed in July. And so this is what you're looking at, a spatial, basically not to think of these projects as one-offs or independent, but they're really across this whole watershed. And you can see here too that they're tracking the science action agenda management needs. That's what the color coding stands for. So things that we've identified as critical in the last science action agenda to providing science for decision making for agencies and other policy relevant questions. And so this is right now you're looking at the research awards. Next slide, please. I'm going to add in now all of the science fellows. So this is the full suite of awards that were released this year. And the fellows here shown with the black outlines, again, are coming across a wide range of university settings. And again, crossing this, all the way from the north of Delta, salmon up near Shasta at the with the salmon hatcheries there, and then down into the Central Valley with land use modeling in the Central Valley. And I'm going to go to the next slide to highlight the more details on these. You can actually see many more details on the website. A very nice information sheet was put, 2 information sheets were put together by Vivian Su. And so you can see those on the website. I think they're also part of your meeting package. But this nice layout here from Jonathan Huang shows you, again, how these projects all are addressing ISB review recommendations. And we thank you so much for leading these efforts that basically promote science advances that we achieve through this larger community by giving out research awards to address these recommendations you've made. So again, many products of yours have been used. I think you can see here the wide range of projects and principal investigators that are within the research awards. And if we go to the next slide, we've got here the principal investigators, again, the students and or postdocs that are working on that are science fellows for the next 2 years. And you can see here, again, the same thing, lots of references to your recommendations in those projects. I'm sorry, in those reviews that you've submitted. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, this brings us to, and I actually want to just highlight again that this work is responsive to the needs that have been, those works that I just talked about were responsive to the needs that are identified in the different assessments that you have produced. And so thank you again for that. I want to also highlight that there is those information sheets again on the website. And so please take a look again for the overlap. I just wanted to make sure I made that clear. There's more information available. So finally, the new article. This one is a big deal. Dr. Shoko Shinbrat with the science program and others, they recently published a paper in SFUs on changing paradigms of knowledge production, interweaving traditional knowledge and predominant science in the Delta. The article is highly relevant given the board's interest in traditional knowledge, and the work is responsive to the recommendations from the Delta ISB's review on the Delta as an evolving place. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Shinbrat for an overview of her article, and then we'll take questions from Shoko after that's covered. So, and we'll move forward with Shoko now if she is online.
I'm here. Can folks hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Good. We can advance to the next slide. Yes, thanks, Lisamarie. I'm really honored and excited to be here. As she said, my name is Shoko Shinbrat. I'm a scientist at the Delta Stewardship Council and work with you all as support staff. And I'm here to present a little bit about what the council is doing to promote traditional knowledge. And this is actually responding to a request that many of the board members have expressed on hearing on this topic. So we can go to the next slide. And I wanted to start with an article that was published a couple of months ago in SFUs, and it was the culmination of almost 3 years of effort. And there were two audiences for this. So at the council level, it was a way to educate ourselves. There were 14 staff and managers who engaged in this material, and then 7 who engaged in authoring it. And then at the scientific enterprise, it's a way to communicate what we've learned in a peer-reviewed journal. Next slide. Okay, so what was the issue that kind of motivated this research? So there's been a lot of interest in traditional knowledge, but most scientists and agencies in the Delta lack an understanding of really what traditional knowledge is and then how to actually engage in successful interweaving. So we started this literature review focus specifically on the Delta, but then quickly found that there was really not very much data or research in this area. So we expanded it to include case studies worldwide, but centralizing the history and kind of lessons learned where possible on the geographic area. So we start the article with a discussion of the history of Indigenous expulsion from their ancestral lands, followed by a discussion of what TK is broadly. And you can click next. So it's just a quick overview for those that you aren't aware. It's really this collection of knowledge of place, practices, and skills, as well as ethics and values. And that's why it's often called a way of knowing. And then one thing that we put a finer point on is that not all Indigenous peoples are traditional knowledge holders, although they might have access to it. Similarly, just because someone is a tribal member does not mean you're necessarily a traditional knowledge holder, and not all traditional knowledge holders are card-carrying tribal members. And because traditional knowledge is this kind of collective knowledge, agencies like the Department of Interior require free, prior, informed consent from both the traditional knowledge holder and the community or nation that they're working with. And these questions really matter when researchers are trying to determine who they should engage in research. Next slide. So what does interweaving actually look like? This is one of the first figures in the article, which shows different models of how scientists work with tribes, communities, and policy makers. And I'll walk you through it step by step with a couple of animations. So next slide. Okay, so it's instructive maybe to see what interweaving is not, or what interweaving doesn't look like. So the first model illustrates a situation where a researcher works on kind of a parallel plane with no interaction with tribes, communities, or policymakers. Next slide, yeah, animation. Okay, so I would say more frequently science operates under this kind of loading dock model where researchers kind of develop their question and then deliver the answers to tribes, communities, or policymakers when they're ready at the end. You can go to the next animation. Some researchers might, of course, consult at the beginning, but might not follow up at the end with the results. You can go to the next one. Model 4 is, some consultation at the beginning, and then, presenting the results back at the end. And then the final one, so we argue that healthy participatory methods is best exemplified by this continuous engagement with tribes to co-create knowledge. And that starts with planning the research, setting the research agenda together, and engaging these nations, communities, and traditional knowledge holders. That requires obtaining free and prior informed consent, receiving and responding to traditional knowledge, and that often requires these social science methods, which we go into a little bit. And then, of course, protecting that tribal data if it's given, and then disseminating the results. Next slide. I think that's all the animations, hopefully. Okay. So then we get into this question of interweaving not just as a question of knowledges, but also fundamentally a question of who has control in what spaces. So we mapped different forms of engagement with tribes across a spectrum. So on the vertical axis, you'll see increasing levels of engagement and power sharing from informing up to empowering. And then on the horizontal axis, you'll see engagement with from the individual level to community level to nation relations. And we map out some methods like listening sessions, consultation, and tribal matter expert engagement, which tend to focus on individuals and might be kind of limited decision-making power. And then you can see up in the top right-hand corner, these government-to-government compacts and negotiations represent nation-level relationships grounded in tribal sovereignty and more equal co-governance. You can go to the next slide. Okay, and then we end our discussion by focusing on 3 potential applications of interweaving in the Delta, and I will walk through each one. So as you probably know, California has been experiencing some pretty horrible, devastating fires, which is perhaps the effect of 175 years of Western informed forest and land management. And it was only actually in last year with Senate Bill 310 that the legislature acknowledged the right of tribes to burn on their ancestral lands. So in the Delta, TK-informed methods of low intensity burning and harvesting of tule actually improves tule yield and water quality. And as a state, we're working on providing opportunities through programs to lead and fund fire management to create a future that's less risky. Next. The second example is restoration. So in the Delta, we've spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars on restoration. I'm sorry, I lost my slide for a second. So we've lost about 90% of our wetlands in the last 150 years through colonization and development, which has led to this poor functioning system. So by bringing in TK holders, we can integrate these localized and longitudinal knowledges that are held by traditional knowledge holders to increase effectiveness. Also, as you see on the slide, tribal beneficial uses is a newer water quality target that we're required to meet in different waters of the state. Next slide. Okay. And then finally, we talk about TK holders can have or do have management knowledge for different species that can help us better steward our invaded habitats for more functional ecosystems. So culturally important plants like mugwort that you see on this slide are early successional species in fire regimes, and they're a nurse plant to other species that can compete with invasives. Okay, next slide. So the rest of this, that's all for this news article. For the rest of this talk, I want to dive into how we are working to accomplish interweaving TK at the council. So as you remember, ISB provided comments on this tribal and EJ issue paper, which is approved in April. And this paper was informed by assembling EJ expert group with 3 CBOs, community-based organizations, and 1 tribal serving organization. And it was really an opportunity to learn from the communities we serve and deepen our relationships with them. Next slide. You'll remember that there were goals for the council, which are on this slide, to integrate environmental justice into the council, to support and recognize tribes, to further tribal and community engaged research and partnerships, and explore ways to address funding inequity. Next slide. So I'm going to talk through how we are doing this at the council. One of the ways that we're approaching integrating tribal justice into the council is through the creation of this forthcoming document on interweaving at TK and Delta Science, which was written for agency employees by agency employees. And you've now actually seen presentation from both of these components that are feeding into the guidance. So that is the literature review that we just talked about, the Suze article. And then Margot presented on the interviews that we did with tribes and with tribal representatives. So we contacted 10 tribes and 5 responded with interest and were interviewed to provide their perspective on how we as an agency could better support interweaving. So both of those efforts are coming together as a white paper for agency staff at the council and beyond into this guide. And we expect for it to be released in early 2026. Next slide. Okay, so how are we supporting and recognizing tribes? So one of the ways is in science venues. So we have this biennial conference, which was held last year in October. And we really worked to bring tribes to this venue. So it was co-chaired by a TK researcher. And we had a whole day of talks on restoration of salmon in the McLeod River, which was a partnership of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, NOAA, and CDFW. And it's a really interesting story. So if you're interested in learning more about it, you can take a picture of the slide and maybe check it out later. We also had a panel discussion on interweaving traditional knowledge and mainstream science. And then finally, we had a session on tribal data sovereignty, focusing on how mainstream scientists can ethically work with tribal data. Next slide. And then, so in our foundational language for our state agency, traditional knowledge is identified as a source of best available science for decision making. But we really continue to lag on integrating other ways of knowing. So to recognize this, we're updating the science plan document to orient the science community towards addressing 4 challenges. And you'll see at the bottom, we've identified as one of our 4 grand challenges that we continue to silo traditional knowledge and other ways of knowing from decision making in the Delta. Next slide. Okay, and then additionally, so to further these tribal and community engaged research and partnerships, we're planning an interweaving roundtable series, and its goal is to really share experiences, challenges, approaches, and opportunities to interweave TK with decision making. We're currently funding 2 tribal representatives and 1 tribal serving organization to co-produce an agenda, discuss what speakers should come, etc. So that's ongoing right now. And this is really going to build on lessons learned from our April 2023 listening session. And we're hoping to have 4 to 6 sessions in spring of 2026. So stay tuned for that. Next slide. I think this is my penultimate slide. So finally, we're trying to bring in greater tribal engagement through our research award process. So this proposal solicitation runs every few years, and projects need to address major scientific needs that are defined in the Science Action Agenda, which is updated every 4 years. So they have to submit an engagement and a communication plan to describe how the project has broader community impact, such as engagement with tribal needs. And you just saw some of the research that was funded. Lisamarie just presented on that. We did extensive outreach to tribes, assessing their interest in connecting to projects that might impact them. And obviously, tribes don't always have the capacity or set up themselves to directly apply to funding, but they could be brought in as a co-PI or sub-award that has ties to their tribal needs. So this actually resulted in the council providing a matchmaking to help researchers identify where they might have a nexus to tribes. And if you're interested in seeing a kind of write-out of the 6 projects, I have the QR code on this slide. And with that, I'd just like to acknowledge the next slide, all of the amazing people who have contributed to this in authoring, conceptualizing, reviewing, contributing, all of the tribes as well. Slide, and with that, I will end. And if we have time for questions, we'll take them now, and if not, you know where to find me.
I have a question. I'll just speak up. Thank you very much, Shoko. That was so interesting. I was just wondering, we heard about, or we hear a lot about community science, and that's something that I think I saw one of the projects geared towards that were funded, geared towards that. Is there a way to engage the tribes in projects like that? Or I'm also thinking, starting with the kids, are there outreach programs to engage the kids more in environmental sciences, to basically foster the interest for the next generation, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so UC Davis has a community science program, and they fund different community science initiatives. Tribes definitely are interested in compensated research and engaging in that. And that's part of the role that we played with the last solicitation. So our previous tribal liaison actually like kind of wrote out a synthesis of like what each of the proposals could be, and then sent them out to tribes to see if there was interest in engaging in those. So yeah, again, it's just a question of capacity. There's only, you know, some of these tribes are quite small and are not necessarily, you know, entirely focused on restoration. They have like the health of their citizens because they're nations themselves. So yes, I think there's a lot of opportunity, but recognizing some of the barriers. Yeah, good question. So
All right. Thank you.
Tanya.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just really great to see. Shoko, thank you so much for sharing all of the just the accomplishments and the great ideas that are coming forth. I've seen a lot of growth in the science program over the last few years in terms of how traditional ecological knowledge is talked about, and that's just really reflected in what you presented today. And so my question was actually about the barriers, which you just started to mention. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on some of those barriers and anything we can do to help overcome some of those barriers.
Yeah, well, so that is a large section of the article, is some of the barriers. One of the barriers is misperceptions, I would say, by the scientific community of traditional knowledge as being less rigorous than other science. And actually, even in our Delta plan, it kind of has best available science ranked with peer-reviewed literature at the top and traditional knowledge at the bottom. So, you know, at least it's there, so that's great. Yeah, just thinking about how we can bring them up on equal footing. I would say there are kind of ways that regulatory documents could be updated to recognize that. I would say also more regularly, like bringing people into spaces where you know, people can become familiar with traditional knowledge holders is another way. But yeah, there are that I would say is maybe the number one barrier. Yeah, it's a challenge that is just going to continue. So, but yeah, I welcome any reflections from the Independent Science Board if you guys have any, you know, ways that you think we can overcome some of these challenges. So, yeah.
There's Obi had a question also.
Yeah, thank you, Shoko. Nice presentation. I'm thinking ahead in terms of, you know, quantitatively estimating the outcomes of implementing the traditional knowledge into, let's say, restoration planning or any other. The question is, do we have enough capacity, or is there more work needed to predict if we implement these along with other plans, what would be the net gain in the benefits of this? In terms of quantitative benefits, I mean, so whether, I don't know if that's, maybe it's a long-term question, but.
Yeah, it's and it's kind of a complicated question. Yeah, because so there has been research. So for instance, Don Hankins, as researcher at Cal State Chico, recently published in, I think it was PLOS ONE, on the quantitative effect of fire on the landscape and the benefits that it provides to water, to, all, many to wildlife, to vegetation, which has been like removed from the landscape. And yeah, so I think with cultural fire, that quantification is like there already. It's like we're kind of seeing the effects of lack of traditional knowledge and cultural practices like burning on the landscape. But it's like catching up maybe to quantify others. And I will also say that, maybe some traditional knowledge holders will say that like we don't need to quantify it, like it's evident on the, the quantification is maybe like a Western science, mainstream science like framework. So but yeah, I think that part of demonstrating its use, at least for like the dominant culture, might be, showing its value through quantification. So yeah.
All right. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah. Virginia.
So in other parts of the United States, I've heard challenges related to what I'll call worker training, and that is like cultural burning. People who know how to implement cultural burning appropriately are often the older people in the tribes, and the youth aren't as always interested. And transferring their knowledge to the youth has been a barrier and a challenge. I wonder if that is holding in the California regions you're dealing with and how you're addressing it.
It's a good question, and I'd love to, chat more with you about this. Yeah, so I will say the few people that I know who do engage in cultural burning are not like, they're like in their 40s or 50s, not like older. But there's this funny, because traditional knowledge holders also still need to get, I think, California Air Resources Board like permitting. They still need to be like, aware of the like context that they're living in. But I think you're right. There is some, I think it's called ITEX, which is basically an indigenous training. I forget exactly, but it's a California specific training program on cultural fire that happens on like a semi-annual basis, and is indigenous like centered. So there are training programs. It's just yeah, it's slow, and there is a lot of interest in it. So even if people want to get training, there's not necessarily enough space. But yeah, good question.
Thank you.
I think I've gone over my time, so I will pass it back to Lisamarie.
Great, thank you, Shoko. Yeah, and I think I might point you to two of our projects that specifically bring in training, tribal engagement and training, and that's the April Robinson proposal on ecocultural burning in the Delta, and the other is the Grantham et al. Proposal on taking co-equal that project into the floodplains and bringing in tribal engagement. So two projects I think have some training incorporated in them that might address your concern, Virginia. Okay, we can move to the next slide, which is one that you've no doubtly heard about, and there's some overlap with past presentations you've gotten from the Department of Water Resources. So on July 24th, the State Water Resources Control Board staff released for public review and comment a revised draft of potential updates to the water quality control plan for the San Francisco Bay Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta watershed. We commonly call this the Bay Delta Plan. And so it was released again a couple of weeks ago, and there's going to be a hearing publicly on the 8th and 9th for oral comments, and then on September 10th is the deadline for written comments to be submitted. The Delta ISB previously reviewed the draft scientific basis reports and draft staff report and or substitute environmental documents that informed this public draft. So you've seen some of this before, but this is the second draft of the plan that was released last year, and that this is the one that is going to be considered for approval. Right now, our staff at the Stewardship Council is on the planning and the science side is reviewing the changes and sending comments. I believe you may be having a comment that gets incorporated with that larger comment letter. The proposed changes are focused on the portions of the plan that are relevant to the north of the Delta and the east of the Delta. So specifically the Sacramento River watershed, the Delta east side tributaries such as the Calaveras, the Cosumnes, and the McCollum rivers, and the Delta in general, and how those interact for the reasonable protection of fish and wildlife beneficial uses. There are also many cultural uses that are incorporated in this particular draft. The July 2025 revised draft updates to the Bay Delta Plan are available for review on the board's website, and it's also part of your meeting package. So again, you can access this on your own. Like in the previous draft, there are several references you need to be aware of to the Delta ISB playing a role in reviewing the 8-year ecological outcomes report. The main addition to be aware of is that the ISB has been added to Appendix A, the Bay Delta Monitoring and Evaluation Program, where the State Water Board may seek advice from the Delta ISB on the gaps left by discontinued monitoring, in addition to initiating a similar process that they're going to do with the Delta Science Program through, again, the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit. And then also the ISB support staff is going to continue to track these updates and its implications for the Delta ISB. So you have folks that are going to inform you, but you may want to take a look at this appendix yourself in particular. I want to highlight again that what's distinct about this update is that there's two accounting pathways. There's the normal accounting pathway of unimpaired flow, and a fraction of that being part of the accounting. And I have to highlight that accounting practices have gotten so good, or I should say they're really improving them within the State Water Board. Some of the efforts through OpenET and other numerical models, it's impressive. But the accounting pathway is either unimpaired flow or the users can elect to subscribe to Healthy Rivers and Landscapes accounting. And that's the accounting process that that you heard more about at the May ISB meeting. It used to be called voluntary agreements, but now it's called Healthy Rivers and Landscapes, or HRL. We oversaw an independent peer review of the science plan of the HRL. And again, there's 4 components that you heard about. There's the strategic plan, the governance plan, the funding plan, and then there's the science plan. We only reviewed the science plan. We oversaw that review, which brought in 3 panelists, or at least 3 letter writers, I should say. And those were Steve Brandt, who's here. We're thankful for him to be here today. Mike Runge, and then also Josh Corman. And all of those letters. It's very transparent. It's all online. The final report is, of course, posted. There's 3 separate letters, and we have invited today Steve Brandt, a former Delta ISB member, to this meeting to provide an overview of the findings and recommendations from the peer review. And I'll highlight that the other subject matter experts were especially in structured decision-making and monitoring evaluations for fisheries. So we can hear from Steve when he is available. And then after Steve's presentation, we can take questions on Steve's presentation, and then any other questions on my report.
Okay, thanks, Lisamarie. And let me first say that it's really great to see all of you again. It's been a while. And I also want to commend outgoing members, Bob and Virginia, for all the hard work and dedication they gave to the board. I certainly enjoyed working with you both when I was there, and look forward to our continued collaboration on a couple of manuscripts I know we're working on. So as was mentioned, you were given a review back, or a briefing back in May, on all the various components of the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program, which really has an overarching objective of looking at trying to increase the natural production of Chinook salmon and maintaining viable fish populations. And with that as a background, I think our review was exclusively focused on the draft science plan. And the draft science plan really is designed to be an overarching framework on how to go about assessing the impacts of flow and non-flow measures on these various components. It's designed to be a comprehensive guide for those that want to develop either system-specific or site-specific science plans. The next slide. Of key importance here is that the hypotheses are really the center of the draft science plan. There's a series of 55 hypotheses, and they are spread from local tier level to full tributary delta level to population level. And this nested geographic tiers is really important because it goes from those on the left that are relatively less complex, and as you move to the right, it becomes more complex and larger time and space scales for dealing with population level things. The non-flow measures or actions include things like habitat restoration and landscape reactivation, improving fish passage, and even controlling predators. And the layout of each of these hypotheses, it's important for you to know the structure so you can understand our review, is that there's a metric of interest that's expected to be changed and a expected level of change. The changes that are predicted are not quantitative, but they are either a positive, negative, or neutral change. That's sort of the expected change. There's a basis for comparison. There's a list of covariates with each hypothesis. In other words, you have an action item, an expected impact, but a list of covariates, which might be other environmental drivers that could also influence the results. And those are largely in listed forms. There are also sections on data management and in the science plan, monitoring, information gaps, and adaptive management. So there's another component of the staged geographic, is that often in the case when you're doing a restoration program, there was sort of a stepwise approach. For example, the first step would be to create a habitat based on habitat needs of a particular species. And then the second hypothesis would be, did you create a habitat that had those key elements for that species? The third component, next step is, well, then if you created that, did fish actually use it? And then fourthly, if they use it, did they actually benefit from using it? So one could conceive of like 4 hypotheses in the development of a restoration program to the actual biological outcome of interest. And that's sort of the way many of the hypotheses are set up. The next slide. The review itself, again, was requested by DWR and overseen by the Delta program, Delta Science program. We were provided with supplemental material spread across 10 documents spanning over 1,000 pages, 3 workshop recordings with a lot of public comment, and of course we were invited to look at the primary and other literature. Of interest to the board is that some of the major documents we were provided as supplemental material were board products. That was our monitoring review and the Fish and Food Web review were part of that background material provided. The 3 of us wrote independent letter reviews. It wasn't like a panel where we got together and discussed things, but they were individual panel reviews. At the end of the day, the science program put together a key takeaways, and we had a chance to review those to make sure that the final key takeaways were largely consensus. The review began on May 1st and ended on June 30th. So it was a 2-month review, and the reports were published in mid-July. The next slide. We were given a lot of very specific questions, but they were targeted across these main components of the science plan itself. The hypotheses, were they sufficient to cover key uncertainties? And I'm just skimming over these. The detailed questions are online as well as in some of our reviews. Were the metrics and covariates appropriate? Was the monitoring and modeling sufficient for the charge at hand? Were there any other pieces of information gaps that would really be critical for enacting the science within this program? And lastly, were the adaptive management and decision support tools sufficient for meeting the objectives of the program? Okay, the next slide. I'm just going to very quickly run through some of the key takeaways. Firstly, there was a lot of good things in this science plan. It was considered to be comprehensive and carefully conceived. One of the fundamental and rather unique components of it is the use of hypotheses. This was in recognition that there is a lot of uncertainty in how these various driving forces affect outcomes, and setting them up as hypotheses with a list of covariates that might also be impacting what you're looking at is a really solid way to look at to do this, and frankly to set up the science. The tiered approach, going from local to tributary to delta to population level, also recognizes that as you increase in time and space scales, the complexities and influence of other drivers are also important, and that was well recognized throughout the review. Some other comments that were made on the positive side were words like robust, ambitious. It really adopted the best available science principles. It endorsed transparency and collaboration and peer review. And it generally supported something that could be called a culture of learning and a, quote, safe to fail approach. So allow that flexibility in the process that if you start something that doesn't work, go ahead and try something else kind of philosophy as you learn. The second takeaway is that the hypotheses presented are really valuable for scientific inference, but may be less effective for management purposes per se. We recommended there could be a lot more detailed discussion as how any particular scientific result might directly connect to management. And I think that there could be, well, I think that's what I'll say for that. There was also some additional hypotheses and metrics that we suggested. For example, growth rates and growth rate potential might be one. In some cases, there was an hypothesis that said some sort of an action would lead to increased food availability. And then the next one down is an increase in abundance of the critter of interest. And we thought maybe growth rate might be an intermediate and more rapid response to increases in food, as one example. And suggested additional hypotheses related to things that affect fish abundance, like mortality, survival, predation rates, and also looking more at the effect of hatchery practices, and specifically with respect to natural and hatchery produced salmon. Okay, the next slide. There were concerns over capturing the effect size of flow and non-flow measurements given the dynamic nature of the ecosystem. Again, the predicted results were positive or negative or neutral. And if one really wanted to look at developing the both a statistically valid monitoring program, and also to have consideration of how cost effective different actions are, it would be important to have a better estimate of what the actual size of those impacts might be. If you're only going to have an increase of a fraction of 1% of something, then A, is it worthwhile from a cost-wide perspective, and B, can you set up a monitoring program sufficient enough to be able to detect that small of a scale? So that was one of the kind of recommendations. There was also a discussion about having more discussion about the covariates. The covariates, the way they are outlined in the science plan, are largely a list of things that could also impact the results. Those might be things like temperature or water flow or dissolved oxygen and so forth. And although there was a lot of effort on talking about how to go about monitoring the impact you're looking for, and certainly the driver of interest, but to have a more, just as rigorous look at those covariates that you think are important. The better you understand the functional nature of, for example, how temperature affects something, you can design your monitoring program to make sure that you're sampling the temperature at the right time and space scales and along to be able to test whether or not that alternate hypothesis, which is really what a covariate is, could actually be important in driving your observed results. So more emphasis on those covariates. With regards to the monitoring and modeling, some of the good things about the monitoring was that they really used our five best practices that we recommended in our monitoring review. It was clear they adopted those in the discussion of the monitoring. There was also a very good review of existing monitoring programs and a lot of effort to tie any new monitoring to existing monitoring programs where possible. We suggested perhaps a more tighter connection between modeling to monitoring was necessary. Clearly, you have a better monitoring program if you can understand what the various connections are between the components of what you're looking at, even at a conceptual level, but also the better that you can understand the nature of the relationships, the better you can design a monitoring program to validate what you're trying to see happening. The last slide is, I said I would go through this quickly, is trying to identify key gaps and uncertainties. The program itself the science plan identified gaps related to differentiating natural and hatchery origin salmon, the consistency of monitoring approaches, the development of data management systems, and the challenges associated with estimating population abundances. And what we suggested is there's maybe three more information gaps. One is a mechanistic understanding of the drivers that affect fish vital rates, particularly in response to flow. This actually came out of a recommendation that the board made in their fish and flows report back in 10 years ago now. An understanding and models of fish food webs. I can't imagine where that came from, but that clearly came out of our fish and flows, or not fish and flows, I'm sorry, the food web modeling review. But it's really important here because there's a lot of the actions being taken were designed to improve the food resources. And food resources were often designed as benthic or zooplankton abundances or production. But understanding where that production is going, which fish are benefiting from it, what sort of competition and predation is prevalent will help you better improve your understanding of how that particular action affects those key species of interest. And then improving in metrics and understanding habitat suitability. Many of the designs of the restoration programs, as one example, were based on current knowledge of what the habitat suitability is for those key species. And if that's weak, then you're developing something that it will only be weakly associated with the benefit to the species. So the better you understand that habitat suitability, the better you could design your non-flow measure activities in particular. The details of the adaptive management decision criteria are vague. There's of course a 3 and a 6-year look at what's going on and an 8-year look at it. But one of the challenges is that there weren't alternative measures. If things don't go right, what were the alternatives? What are the alternative plans? And also, when you look at the list of hypotheses, they're quite variable in their doability. Think about 55 hypotheses. How many of those would need to go your way in order to consider the program successful? And the hypotheses themselves are quite different in their doability. Some are just measuring acreage. Others are looking at the validity of a specific technique, such as an isotopic signature. And others are looking at lower food levels. Some are looking at temperature. And some of the key ones are looking at whether or not there's been an increase in production of the species of interest. So how you value those different hypotheses when it comes to an adaptive management approach was the question. And then finally, there were concerns of the 8-year time frame, thinking it may be too short given the high interannual variability and a lot of the things you're looking at, not only the drivers, but just the species themselves, and the fact that you're dealing with some species such as Chinook salmon that have a 3 or more year lifespan, and how well can you really document things over an 8-year time frame. So that, like I said, was going to be very quick, and that's a summary, and I suggest there's a lot more detail if you dive into the various reviews. So that's my report.
Steve, thank you so much for that. I'm going to highlight that Department of Water Resources also greatly appreciated your review, as well as the other 2 letter writers, and they are writing a response letter to be posted on the website at some point this summer. So thanks for boiling it down to 8 takeaways, because there was a lot in there. But I think you captured really the highlights. Thank you. I think, Bob, you can go ahead.
Great, thank you. And Steve, great presentation. That's really a very nice job that you did in making it understandable. I do have a couple of questions. So, one relates to, I was wondering if there was much discussion of kind of the ontogeny, the life cycles of individual species, and how they might be addressed in terms of limiting factors. Because when fish first hatch out of the eggs, those first foods that they take are absolutely critical, but they're very different from the foods and the habitat that are often needed, in year 1 and year 2 or year 3. And then there's also fish species that spend basically their entire life cycle in fresh water, and move within the delta. And then there's others that go to the ocean and they're influenced by ocean conditions or conditions in San Francisco Bay. Is there much consideration of that, within the program?
I would say in general, yes, but there's some caveats. For example, the salmon, if you just look at their original series of hypotheses, I happen to have them here, they talk about looking at the red density, and then so spawning habitat, rearing habitat, their survival at the juvenile stage, migrating down, those kinds of things. So they deal with a number of hypotheses that deal with different life stages of the salmon. And there's also the same with some of the other species like the long fin smelt and so forth, of looking at larval and juvenile versus adults. Where the caveats are is, one is the marine phase wasn't really considered, and that was one of the things that the reviewers brought up, the marine phase of salmon. And also that when you're looking at the food was still largely in the category of zooplankton or benthic density, without looking at the species specific or size specific needs of the species of interest in terms of prey. And so that's not categorically, but in general, that's what I thought.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. That's probably a lot or too much detail for a first time through, looking at a plan and so forth, but important to point out. Second question really revolves around, was there much discussion of a life cycle model of being able to using the life cycle models to try and pull everything together? Or
yeah, there was this section on, of course, in the adaptive management framework on structured decision making. And in fact, one of the reviewers, Runge, I think, got into quite a bit of that discussion about their structured decision making, which included life cycle models. And as part of that, of course, there are those for salmon and smelt, and one Delta smelt, and one developing for the longfin smelt is under development. And there may have been discussion about the sturgeon too, but there was clearly that use. But my own view was, it was sort of after the fact. It was like when things are collected, then you get into the adaptive management summary framework. Then you look at the life cycle models, which are part of that structured decision-making process, as opposed to one could bring that up front and start it at the very beginning to help design the layout of whether the important and sensitive times and factors and so forth. So it's definitely in there, but
Yeah, it'd probably be nice if they brought that out and made it a little more central within the plan, and to help organize people's thoughts and activities. So anyway, I'll stop there, and thank you again. That was a great presentation.
And if I could just add to that, I think there are I want to say well-developed models, but there's also, as you know, you can develop conceptual models for what's going on for these species, whether or not we know the details of any particular component of the life cycle model, but you can certainly develop a structural conceptual model and start up front and help design what you're thinking of doing and how it might be impacted by that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that very much so, because I think that also helps with the field work. As you have the conceptual model, you don't want to always have them quantified, but having that conceptual model is important, because when you're out in the field and you see things happen, or you observe, you make observations, that can be brought back into the conceptual model and certainly quantified later. So anyway, that is a very important aspect of the whole process. Anyway, thanks again.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for that great presentation. I agree. It's nice and clear what you were able to pull out. So my question relates very much to this conversation about conceptual models and life cycle models. Sometimes, given the confounding factors, given the high variability we know we have in fish populations, was there any attempt in the adaptive management plan to discuss what might be leading indicators, maybe things that are less susceptible to confounding factors that aren't as ideal as having, the proof being in the pudding of great reproduction or great, fish populations, but something that would help you understand if you were more likely to be on the right track? Any discussion of that?
Well, I think, like I say, some of the metrics are quite variable. In some cases, the metrics were temperature and oxygen. So that is the metric of interest. So, and that sort of puts that up front as something that is of interest. You're on the right track. I think the whole, for each of these hypotheses, is a column of predictions. And the prediction is either an increase or decrease, or neutral, no change. And so I think, that's what kind of the overall looking for, is whether or not you're on the right track by having that increase or decrease and so forth. I think the conceptual model component of it is that, again, it's a matter of, if you have a key driver and a key metric of interest and a list of covariates, a conceptual model that goes beyond that and says, how will these particular covariates impact what you're looking at? And frankly, are your key drivers, whether it's flow, for example, will they have any impact on the covariates? Is another sort of thing that needs to be thought about, and the conceptual models can help you frame that. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but.
Yeah, you did. And I just wanted, this is to Lisamarie, if these memo reports are available, I'd be interested in getting links to them. So thank you.
Inga?
All right, thanks. I was particularly interested in seeing that you mentioned the importance of the connection between modeling and the monitoring, and I just wanted to make sure I understood you right there. because I've been thinking about this regarding monitoring and how important it is to talk to modelers ahead of time when designing a monitoring program. So you have an idea of what they actually need in order to make the data that's being collected useful. Is that what you meant in this point? Is that what was meant, or could you elaborate, please?
Yeah, as you know, and this came out a lot in our own monitoring review and adaptive monitoring framework kind of discussions, is that if you can better understand the functional relationships between the things you're looking at, in this case, whether it's the metric and the measure or action item, plus the covariance, the better you can understand those relationships, whether they're just arrows or whether they are functional relationships that you can understand, even how the curve is shaped. That gets you in a position to better understand the time and space scales you need to do your monitoring. And that's not just geographically on a face, it's also the sequence of timing. And for me, thinking about temperature and its nonlinear relationship to growth, we know what that relationship looks like. We know how accurately you need to measure temperature, how frequently. Doing monthly temperatures is not going to be valid. But knowing that relationship, for example, helps you better design the monitoring program so that you're sampling soon enough in the season, late enough in the season, and frequently enough, for example, to capture that relationship.
Yeah, that's a great example, of course. That's easy to measure temperature, but yeah, that type of thing. Yeah, thank you.
Well, not seeing any more questions. Let me just ask, is there any questions for me before I just wrap up and pass back the screen to Inga? Virginia. Yeah.
I'm trying to find my hand.
All the time, yeah.
Okay, I was really intrigued because you mentioned in the collaboratory that you were in these 3 different examples, which I thought is great that you're following 3 different approaches because it'll really stress the system. But that you were looking at common models and approaches. And models are always written for specific questions. And, there's been a lot of modeling problems when people take one model meant for one question and try to adapt it to another. Sometimes you can do that, but sometimes it causes challenges. So I wondered how you were going about approaching this really good goal of having common models and approaches and the challenges of dealing with the different questions in those different examples.
Yeah, thanks for that, Virginia. Yeah, by saying common models, I don't by no means mean it's literally the same model being used in each one. There are hydrodynamic models that will have outputs that are useful by all 3 of the groups. And so that's what I mean by more common, maybe common model outputs or common model inputs. But each group really is addressing their questions on their own with the data sets that they currently have, and then identifying what data sets would help them accelerate the pace of discovery, or push further towards not just the simple project they can work on just right now, but maybe push forward better future looking forecasting type work, for example, or scenario testing. So I misspoke if I said that it's common models between them. There'd be common modeling approaches and or data sets that they could use in their independent models, because you're right, there are 3 very different types of questions, but they obviously intersect in important ways. Like sea level rise affects all 3 of those, and so on. So which sea level rise model should they be using, and could we try to focus on salient boundaries so that they're not all just operating in their own space, but can be linked together at a later time in an integrated way. So yeah, thanks for pointing out that concern. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that really helps a lot. And so when I've done something like this, I've ended up coming up with diagrams of how the models relate that kind of show the common outputs and inputs. And maybe you've already done that, but the words you provided just now are much more clear. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say that, yeah, graphical descriptions are going to be part of the white paper, the synthesis in the end. So yeah, a big part of this is communication, visualization, and communication to bring people in. So thank you for highlighting that. I think, Obe, you're the first hand that went up.
Thank you,
Sure.
Lisamarie. Nice presentation. I must congratulate you for, recruiting 3 excellent members to the board, and I think we'll be doing well with all 3 of them. I know at least one of them. So I do have a question on the collaboratories, along with what maybe Virginia asked. One of the lessons we learn in Florida is like, interagency coordination is very important, and this collaborator is supposed to address that. So was there a discussion on modeling standards across agencies when you develop develop this framework for collaboratory? And yeah.
There has not been a conversation of standardization amongst the different projects right now, because within each group there's agency, academics, consultants, and so on. I think that will be addressed within groups about how to work together. But right now it's very exploratory, and we're letting them scope aspirational modeling, which is going to need at some point, some agreements of how best to work together. But right now we did not put a standardization.
Okay, that's good. I was curious if there is a way for the board to at least get the transcripts of the monthly meetings, or are those recorded in some way?
Yeah, we have, we call it the extranet, where we have shared files amongst the groups. And so I'm trying to imagine like at what point there'd be something that you might want to look at because right now it's pretty much working documents. So but
that's fine.
Ask. So
yeah, at some point it would be good to kind of see what's happening in there.
Yeah, we meet tomorrow, so I'll bring that up tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. And then Lisa.
Obe wants to see the sausage being made, apparently.
Yeah, right.
I'm excited about that collaboratory too, but I have 2 other points. First, I just want to clarify my question about the letters. I do realize that you shared the letters with us as part of our meeting materials, but I would still like a shareable link if available on the review and the HRL review. And then I had a question about the carbon group, and I'm really glad to see that coming together. It's nice to build, certainly the review that the ISB did raised a lot of questions, and it's really important that groups sort of take up the mantle of, okay, now we've raised questions, how do we move forward? So that's really great to see. My question had to do, this is more like just, I'm curious, it's not anything critical, but when we've looked at major sources of greenhouse gas emissions, something that comes up a lot is the tundra areas or the permafrost areas that have the potential for a lot of loss of peat and organic material. And I'm just curious if the work in California is going to have implications for other sites, colder sites. Would there be enough overlap in the biogeochemistry to have learning about things that might work in other regions?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I don't think this is just only applicable to the Delta. I will say that most of what we know about rewetting peats comes from northern peatlands, which is of course the biggest component on the planet is the northern peatlands. So we learn from that about applying those practices here. These practices here are also useful in the tropics. So there's tropical peatlands that are huge sources that can benefit from what we learn here in the Delta. and of course, we're learning from the tropics, of course, back to us about how to, block channels and encourage rewetting of soils and so on. But I will say that one of the strengths of the Delta, and this is, I think, what Lauren Damon and Sydney Chamberlain are really pushing forward on, is we have this incredible network of data that's been collected through those eddy covariance towers, and then also just even the chamber work that was done back in the early 2000s. And I mean, this is formative stuff for the IPCC wetlands chapters, stuff that came out of the Delta. So the Delta work is already informing global scale information, and so it's certainly relevant to that. But I do think there's dynamics about freeze thaw, things like that in the Arctic regions that are very different than what we have here. And I'm certain that Diane would agree with me on that. That said, when we start thinking about these bigger models and pulling all these pieces in, the Delta is a well-documented, well-understood site. We might say we don't know it, but compared to other regions, we actually have some very good understanding of what rewetting can and can't do here. So yeah, I think of it as being relevant to the Arctic and the tropics ultimately. I don't know if that answers your question, Lisa.
Absolutely, very thoroughly, and I'm glad to hear that we can bring data to bigger issues through our careful study.
Okay, no more hands. So thank you for inviting me back, and I'll see you in November. Actually, I'll see you in September because I'll be at the Climate Symposium. Thank you for hosting.
Well, thank you so much, Lisamarie, Steve, and Shoko for great presentations and great information. And so no more questions to be asked. Are there any public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
There are none. So we can go into a short break, 15-minute break. I just had to write down Pacific time, 11:05 Pacific time. We'll reconvene. And thank you again for being here. Great to see you, Steve. Bye-bye. So welcome back to the August meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. We continue with agenda item 4, which is a discussion of the decision-making under deep uncertainty review. I'll just give a brief background. The Delta ISB is conducting a review on the scientific tools and concepts that can increase the capacity to anticipate and adapt to growing uncertainty of future conditions in the Bay Delta system. These tools and concepts are often classified as decision-making under deep uncertainty. And I will turn it over to Lisa Wanger now for a status update. Lisa.
Thanks, Inga. So really the group is working on 4 products. 2 have been completed and 2 are underway. So the 2 products that have been developed so far are the seminar synthesis report that was published in October of 24. And then the next product is the manuscript that was based on the inventory and analysis of scenario planning that was led by Dr. Shoko Shenbrat of the Delta Science Program, and it was submitted to the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences for a special issue on post-normal decision-making. And so that manuscript has now received reviewer feedback, and we're addressing that. Shoko's leading that, and the rest of the team is helping. And the top major comment that we got was defining when it's really most useful to use the tools of decision-making under deep uncertainty, or, including uncertainty in scenario planning, and when it may be less useful. So, we certainly acknowledge that the effort involved to incorporate uncertainty adds time and effort to analyses, and that time needs to be balanced with a substantial payoff to make it worth it. And so we appreciate that comment, and we're going to include more about the best uses of that. And then another major comment was on how we linked participation and cognitive biases. And what the reviewers were getting at is that you can have unintended effects of bringing in a lot of voices and diverse voices into a conversation about what to analyze in terms of scenarios. And while, of course, we value diverse input, the unintended consequences can be that a lot of voices can end up converging on dominant ideas. There can be people who are influential in the group. It's sometimes called groupthink. And so you don't necessarily get as broad a range of ideas when you do that. And so it's a very good point, and we're well aware of it. And so we're going to incorporate more about that into the piece. So, so that'll be, those issues will be addressed and it'll be resubmitted. And now we're moving forward with a perspective piece that will contain findings and recommendations from the whole effort, including engaging with people in government, the board, and the broader community. So we've identified a prominent policy-oriented journal that I think will be appropriate for publishing a perspectives piece that will bring together findings and recommendations. And of course, the next step, we're in the process of sort of compiling our ideas using the journal's preferred format, and then we will share it more broadly for feedback before submitting it for publication. And then the final product will be, once we finalize that article, we'll create a short synthesis product that will draw key points from all the other products and make some clear recommendations that are oriented toward the Delta specifically. So that's where we are. Any questions any questions from the board?
That sounds great, Lisa. Thank you. Any questions? I don't see any hands.
We should just check for public comments then.
Yeah,
There are none.
there are none. Okay, moving right along. Thank you, Lisa. It sounds great. Actually, I have a question. That last product you mentioned, is that going to be a publication as well, or is it just going to be like a summary
That'll be a
paper?
board product is the idea. So a more typical kind of review report from
Okay.
the board that will draw together the pieces in a nice, succinct way so that people can understand the main points.
Thank you very much. Right, no public comments, so we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the upcoming Climate Science Research Symposium. And I will give a little bit of background as well. The Delta ISB plans to organize and host a public symposium on the current state of climate science and how organizations in the region are considering climate change. This will occur at UC Davis from September 16th to 17th, and a Zoom option will also be available. The symposium is a public meeting of the Delta ISB as well. I will turn it over to Obi now to provide a status update.
Yes, thank you, Inga. Since the last meeting, we have been working on developing the agenda and also contacting speakers. And we received a lot of help from the staff, and I want to thank them for that. And I believe the agenda is coming together very well, and I will show that to you in a few minutes. Registration is open now, and it is optional, but will be helpful for us to have, for planning purposes, to have all the registrants, at least listed and known. I believe we have about 50 in-person attendees and another similar number for remote participation. So I feel like we already have good response from the general public and others. So the final agenda will be posted 10 days before the symposium, if not earlier. We are still trying to iron out some details of the agenda, identify a few more speakers. We have had a lot of discussion on the existing literature or other documents. As we know, there have been a lot of work done in this topic. And so there was a lot of effort, particularly led by Dr. Anna Michalak, who actually developed or used the notebook LM with the help of staff to prepare a summary. And I think that will be presented or will occur on September 10th at noon. People who are registering for the symposium can also register for that event. It will not be a public meeting, but will be open to the public. So Dr. Michalak will be, who is a co-convener for this symposium, will lead the summary or the walkthrough for the tool and the summary. So perhaps you can bring up the agenda. I don't know, Edmund, if you can bring up the agenda. I just want to go through, I think it's important to kind of describe where we are. So if you can move down, after the initial introductory session, so we have several important sessions. So the very first one is what we call the State of Science keynotes. We have two speakers. One is Daniel Swain from California Institute for Water Resources, University of California, ANN. And we have specific questions for that plenary presentation. And the second one would be by Laura Larson, and we all know who that is, and she's now with Uppsala University. And she will talk about, she'll give a synthesis of how climate change projections are used for water resources management worldwide. So I think these plenary discussions will be extremely valuable to start the symposium. The next, we are going into an emerging climate science panel, series of presentations on some key hazards, maybe not all of them. We start out with a climate modeling presentation by Paul Ulrich from UC Davis. Then we have recruited Benjamin Hatch from Colorado State to talk about atmospheric rivers and precipitation. And to talk about snowpack and snowmelt, we have Alan Rhodes from LBL. And we also have a presentation on droughts by Mike Hobbins, University of Colorado Boulder. And we have an event, a session talk for wildfires, but we haven't identified a suitable speaker yet. And then the other key hazard would be the sea level rise and flooding. Dan Cahen, UC San Diego, he's very well known in the region, has a lot of experience. He will be giving that talk. Each of these are 10-minute short talks, but later we have a 1-hour panel discussion. Not only we, have audience ask questions, but also have a panel, have panel discuss some key questions that we have come up with, and you see the panelist questions on the agenda. If you can move down after the lunch, we have another session, basically how to link the state of science that we have heard about to support long-range planning. And I think, are they adequate, or can the models accept the cutting-edge science and so forth? So for that, we have identified a couple of speakers, Dan Cahen, who is in the previous panel as well, Mike Dettinger, another well-known researcher in the region who has done a lot of work in the Bay Delta region, and Romain from DWR, who has also done a lot of work for the agency. Perhaps one other panelist. And if you can move down, then we have an open forum, and that'll be facilitated by Lisa Windham, ISB board member. Will provide an opportunity for participants who are not speaking, but to provide their input. We'll also take some public input at that time. It's a 1-hour session. Then on day 2, Anna would take over to facilitate the meeting. we'll have a session on integrating science for decision support in Delta. Basically, we have recruited some speakers, primarily from agencies, from U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and some of the other key agencies. And we have asked them to present information on some key questions as to how they are using the climate information and projections into planning. And more importantly, what type of uncertainties are most useful and critical for decision support, and a couple of other questions here. Then the next session would be will be presented by Brett Barker, who is a former attorney, and basically from a farming point of view, I believe, how will be the climate information be valuable for their work. And then finally, we have a 1.5 hour presentation or this panel that Anna would moderate. Again, we'll have audience questions and on the presentations, and there are several important questions that we have listed here. And by the way, this agenda is available in our board package. And if you move down, so there is a group activity, but basically moderated by Jonathan Wong of the Delta Science program. He has basically developed a summary of conceptual model. I think that's one of the things that some of the board members wanted to see. And that would be one of the outcomes. Can we come up in an updated version of a conceptual panel? And finally, and I'm going to ask Lisa to explain this. This is one of the outcomes. I think she would be better to explain this than I can in this particular case. Ease versus current capacity or resource commitment. Lisa, can you explain this to the board and others?
Yes, I'll try to put your uncertainty to rest here of what this is. So this is an example from a report I helped develop for NOAA. We were looking at different ways to help NOAA prioritize investments in social science. And so I've used this before. Other people within the Delta Science program have used this before. And it's really just a way of synthesizing group thinking around, good group thinking around how hard it will be to fill gaps through specific actions and what the potential impact of those actions are. And so it's a way to synthesize ideas on this plot. And so what the two axes are, ease is a combination of everything that goes into doing an analysis or presenting an action. So that includes data availability, state of knowledge, and analytic difficulty, including how long it would take to develop the models or run the models. And then on the other axis is impact, and that's how useful something is. How well will it support decisions? And so these points represent what the group considered the most typical case. And the bar, you can add bars if you like to show that there is some uncertainty or variability around both the ease and the impact can have variability depending on how you go about something. But in this case, we just chose to show the bars around the impact. And it's meant to be a decision support tool saying, if you want to make investments that forward the goals that we talked about at the workshop, here are the ones that have the highest impact per effort. And of course, you can think about short-term versus long-term and have priorities within both those categories. So that's the basic idea. And we may not get full consensus, but it still helps synthesize what happened in the workshop.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Now, I don't have any uncertainty anymore. I'm just kidding here. But anyway, thank you, Lisa. I think for explaining that. Finally, there are a couple of things we want to achieve as outcomes of this symposium. One is the brief memo of the highlights of the symposium and potentially also writing a perspective piece if the discussion allows it or warrants it. The second potential outcome is, Jonathan has done a lot of research on the existing conceptual models, and you see that on the screen, collected all the available ones. And is there a way we can fine tune these and come up with a consensus conceptual diagram or structure that would be useful for us going forward? So that's another outcome that we are hoping to have. And so I think there are several examples of those that he has assembled. So there will be time in the symposium to discuss some of these. And then finally, something I want to note. I was invited to participate in the Estuary Conference this year in October. And there is a session entitled Science Management and Governance in the Era of Climate Change and Extreme Events. I seem to have a conflict with another symposium I'm organizing for American Society of Civil Engineers, but if not one of our key, ISB members who are involved in the climate symposium will hopefully attend that panel. ISB will be represented by one of us, and there are 5 panel members. So that'll be another opportunity for us to convey what the outcomes of the symposium are after the symposium in September. That's all I have, Inga. I'll be happy to answer any questions, or maybe Anna or Lisa.
Thank you,
can
Obi.
answer.
Anna,
Yeah, I just had one really quick clarifying point. Obe mentioned this session on September 10th that's based on this Notebook LM generated summary of key literature. Just to clarify, that's not a required session, and that's just for people who want to have a way to actually interact with the system and potentially post their own queries from those documents. But we also have a compiled summary, so people can just work with the static summary if that's sufficient for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Bob, you had a question.
Well, not so much question. Well, I guess it is a question. First of all, I want to say to Obe and the others, boy, you guys have really been busy. It looks like things have come together reasonably well over the last couple of months. So I would guess that behind the scenes, there was a lot of scrambling going on, and you've ended up with a good program. My question really is around the program. It seems to have deviated somewhat from the prospectus, in the sense that I think, if I recall, there's been so many different versions of the prospectus, I may not be clear on this, but the prospectus, it seems as though I recall kind of not or NGO organizations being invited to become involved in the workshop, because they're doing a lot of work in other sectors to actually implement climate change programs or activities to mitigate the effects of climate change. But in looking at the agenda, it doesn't seem as though any of those organizations have been invited to contribute in a direct way. Is that true, or am I completely off-base?
Well, we do have at least participation of the Nature Conservancy. So I'm hoping them being a key NGO involved in the climate work, they would participate. And also we have this other gentleman from Brett Barker, who is not necessarily with an NGO, but maybe private sector type. But I think Nature Conservancy is involved in the symposium and have a presentation at the symposium.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for. I think I want to credit also the staff who have been working hard to try to bring the agenda together, and they have been contacting speakers, and that has been very helpful for us.
We have some more raised hands, Tanya?
Yeah, it looks like you all have done just a great job here, and I really just have a very minor question for Lisa. As I was excited about her little decision support figure, and should probably just go read the whole report. But can you clarify, Lisa, with the x-axis with ease, does it get harder or easier as you go down that axis?
It gets harder to the right.
Okay. Okay, that's what I
Ah.
thought, but I was like, am I misinterpreting this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the draft we have, it's called effort. But yes,
Got it.
right, that's you're right, that is confusing. We should have caught that in that report.
Okay. I thought for
Thank
sure
you.
it was the other way. Yes, yes.
I think it's because we originally called it effort and someone didn't like that.
Oh, I like effort.
Changed it at the last minute and apparently didn't recognize that change. Thank you for
Cool.
noticing
All
that.
right, thank you.
Virginia. Oh, you're muted.
Right, I have to find the unmute. Okay, so my question is the second part of what Bob raised. I don't really see much discussion about mitigating effects of climate change. It could be under the wildfire section. It could be under the, integrating science for decision support, but it looks like much of that section is about looking at resilience to climate change. Are you still thinking about including mitigation efforts?
If I can answer, maybe others can chime in. Our original scope, the mitigation was not a key aspect of our goal. Was basically to understand the hazards, how they're changing, and implications of different types of hazards. But I don't think we were focusing as much on mitigation, if I understand where you're going with that. But I don't think that was a big focus of our symposium. Maybe others can chime in if that's different.
Well, it is different, but I think you're losing out part of the story if you don't have some discussion of it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think Anna, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Virginia. I think, throughout this planning, we've had this tension between, having it be focused, but recognizing that there's a really broad scope that can be addressed. The original core vision for the workshop, as Obe just said, was really on understanding what is the state of the science in terms of understanding climate projections on the Delta system, and then how that science then flows through. And so you're right that in the end, mitigating the impact, so adapting to the climate changes, is also part of that, in the sense that uncertainties in our ability to project climate in the region then has impacts on the ability to mitigate impacts. But the core piece of the workshop is really on that evolving science and whether and how that science is sufficient for planning and making its way into planning. So I wouldn't say what you're suggesting is, let me not make a double negative. I think what you're suggesting, Virginia, is within the scope. It's just not the core of the scope. And in that second day, those topics can definitely come into play, and certainly in moderating some of the more open discussions, we can bring up some of those ideas as well.
Okay, so I'm not suggesting changing the whole scope from understanding, but but to me, understanding is including mitigation, which is quite different from adaptation. I see them as two different sides of the coin. And you do talk about adaptation in some places. Anyway, that's just my perspective, that I think it's really important, particularly in California, particularly with wildfires And also with your subsidence, there are real opportunities for mitigation.
And I'm not disagreeing. I guess the point I'm making is that I think that is a valid topic, and the piece of that topic that I think is the most natural fit for the flow of the agenda is, in what ways is the state of the science in climate projections informing that mitigation, and what are the key uncertainties or gaps that are standing in the way of more effective mitigation? Whereas the piece that's a little bit further removed is, what are the current plans for mitigation? That I would say is sort of nearing the sort of the edge, or maybe going a little bit beyond the original intended scope of the workshop.
And I mean, that could be a topic that we can think about. I don't think we discussed that idea of mitigation in the scope extensively. You know, I feel like it should involve a lot broader group of agencies than maybe the ones that we are working with, but something that we can discuss later after the symposium, if that's an important topic. We just didn't have enough space time-wise to cover all these topics in one symposium.
Sorry,
yeah.
I would just weigh in briefly that I think I agree with Anna that this is really meant to be, are we providing enough the right kind of information for decisions, and are we up to date in what we're using in decisions? And so we could just simply add a question to that one session that Anna's moderating that asks more specifically about, do you have what you need to design mitigation? Or, just if the right people are there.
And I see that Bob has a comment, but I would just be, if we add a question, let's be careful about wording, because climate mitigation typically refers to things like reducing emissions and so on, but that's not the kind of mitigation that Virginia has in mind here.
That's true. So
we should just pick the right words, but I think that idea, Lisa, is
it'd be good. Virginia, can you be more clear then? I was thinking greenhouse gas mitigation is where you were going with.
Well, I am going to
think
greenhouse gas mitigation, but not through human behavior, mainly through environmental management type things, because that's what our focus is. There's policy, there's human behavior, and then there's management of the environment, which I see as the focus. I want to hear what Bob has to say, though.
Okay,
well,
Bob.
actually, Virginia, what I'm going to say is, I think first of all, you're absolutely right. And in many ways, the discussion we're having right now really speaks to a follow-up workshop or symposium that is focused on the outcome of this one. And I guess in my mind, I had always thought that was the idea, that this wasn't just going to be a one-off workshop symposium. It was going to be actually leading into something that we got to the point where we would eventually get to the point in a year or so where we would be talking about specific actions or mitigations, activities that could be undertaken to kind of blunt the effects of, or manage better the effects of climate change. And it seems to me it ought to be something to be kept in the forefront of everyone's mind during this workshop as to where we're going next. And bring it to a logical conclusion in some way a year or so out. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it. I think you're absolutely right. I like the idea of Jonathan, pulling together all the various models, and they have beautiful images of all these models and so on. But the models don't mean a thing unless there's activities, real on the ground activities associated with them. And it seems like we're really good at building these beautiful models and putting them up on the screen, but we're not so good at actually doing the things that are needed in day-to-day life to mitigate, climate change effects. So anyway, I'll stop there. I see Anna's got her hand up again. So here we go.
Yes, maybe two comments. One, a clarifying question for me, Virginia and Bob, when you say mitigation in this context, do you mean climate mitigation in the way that it's thought of in sort of the IPCC sense? In other words, reducing greenhouse gas emissions or increasing carbon sequestration? I thought what I understood, Virginia, when you first spoke, at least the way I interpreted your comment, was mitigation in a slightly different sense. Of, for example, if climate change is creating conditions that are more ripe for large-scale wildfires, what might we do to mitigate the risk of those wildfires? As an example, it would be helpful for me to understand which aspect of, or which definition of mitigation you had in mind, because that second one, I would say, even though you're mitigating the impacts of climate change, to my mind, that still falls under the broad umbrella of adaptation, again, in the sort of IPCC sense of how adaptation is thought of, is my first question for Virginia. Bob, I completely agree that, a 2-day workshop symposium is by no means going to, close the conversation on this huge topic. As you remember, originally, what we had planned was 2 one-day symposia, where the first day would be purely on the science, and then the second day would be more on the how does that science feed into decision support. And for a variety of reasons, we decided to essentially bring those 2 together. And so you'll still see that first day is more focused on what was originally envisioned for the first workshop, and the second day is more focused on the second one. But your point, which is well taken, is that in of itself is not going to cover it. And I completely support the idea of using this as a jumping off point for thinking more deeply about what else we could be doing and thinking about climate. And maybe, I'm sorry, my last comment is, I'm not sure how much this is clear from the agenda, but in the internal conversations that Obe and I and Lisa and the staff have been having, we sort of see that as this hierarchy of 3 types of analysis that we wanted to cover in the workshop. One is the climate science itself. What do we know about future climate projections in the Delta? Things like temperatures, precipitation, sea level rise, and so on. The second then is, how does that knowledge or those uncertainties translate into the types of models that are used more locally or regionally to support understanding and management within the Delta system? And that's where the types of models that Jonathan was showing come into play. And then the third level then is the use of those models then as part of the process of decision making and management within the Delta. So the sort of 3 levels of hierarchy is somewhat reflected in the agenda, but is also the way that we are conceptualizing grouping of the various speakers and the themes that we see emerging as part of the discussion. So I hope that's helpful, because I don't know if it's clear just by looking at the agenda, but that's at least how we were thinking the conversation would evolve over the course of the 2 days.
It sounds great.
So Anna, I think your 3 levels of analysis were pretty clear to me from the agenda. And that's kind of why I asked the question, because it really focuses on climate science per se, and not the part that I think of management that goes into that. And the wildfire example you presented is exactly what I'm talking about, because there are ways where we don't need to repeat the example again, but you can manage for wildfires, reduce, carbon flux, and improve the situation. It is very different from just focusing on climate. And maybe the best way is to think about questions at the end that should be forthcoming from this that could lead to future workshops, analysis, or whatever. And that's how all good science ends, with better questions and where we go.
Well, that would certainly be a great thing to think about, if we could have a follow-up or another symposium or workshop that evolves from this or adds on to it. I think that would be a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, just to wrap this up, I think, unless there are any other questions, Inga, I think we had our original scope, very beginning, was very narrow. We kind of expanded it to incorporate how the agencies are using the hazard information, because the original thinking was that the science is evolving rapidly, and we need to know how the hazards are changing and what's the latest thinking. So I think we I mean, I understand the management is an important aspect. We didn't discuss that as being a part of it. And let's see what the symposium, comes out with. Maybe the audience will bring up questions that would lead us to think about a follow-up symposium on management that will help the, mitigation aspect, the way that Virginia explained. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Thank you for a very good discussion, and hopefully we'll have a follow-up symposium maybe next year or the year after. We'll see. Are there any public comments?
Or none.
None. All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to the next ongoing current effort of the board, which is the preparation for the contaminant monitoring review. So just to give you some background, the Delta ISB plans to conduct a review on contaminant monitoring in the Delta and risk assessment as well. The draft prospectus was circulated for public comments. We received 9 public comment letters, and we have addressed all of those. We have also revised the prospectus and finalized it based on the board's approved motion at the last meeting. So I know you haven't had a chance to look at it most likely, but I hope you like the result. And so the next step is to post it, and we're planning, of course, to move on with the review now. Phase 1 will be the interviews of experts on contaminant monitoring in the region. We will develop questions and a matrix of how those questions will answer or provide various components of the review, and so that it can be very goal-oriented, and it can also be evaluated and analyzed in a structured fashion. So thank you, Tanya, for that suggestion. We haven't, Jonathan already did his homework. I have to take a look at it now, and then we'll send it to the review leads for further review. We are planning to start with the interviews in the fall, and we will soon have to start finding appointments and slots that suit everybody. We are also continuing to gather literature and reports that can be useful for the reviews, and that's basically where we are right now. Are there any questions from the board? I see none. Okay, and are there any public comments?
There are none.
All right, well, that was quick. Then we move on to agenda item 7, very important, reflections from outgoing board members. Dr. Bob Nyman and Dr. Virginia Dale are both ending their term, as we have heard from Lisamarie Windham-Myers. Their term ends on August 31st, but they will be back to attend the ISB Climate Symposium in September in person. And I'm very sorry, I can't be there in person, so I will not see you in person again. We will now give them an opportunity to reflect on their term at the Delta ISB. So Bob is first on my list, but whoever wants to go first can go first. Virginia, okay, Virginia.
You didn't see me. Okay. Well, when I was asked to do this, I have to admit the first thing that came to mind was the good, the bad, and not anyway, I thought of it as the constraints and opportunities we have by the different regulations that are out there. So there are many good aspects of serving on the ISB. It's been such a pleasure to work with professionals who support the board, those who serve on the board in the Delta Stewardship Council, and those who work for the state and federal agency, as well as the stakeholders and those presenting non-governmental organizations. All these people clearly have good intentions, and they work hard to come to useful and appropriate resolutions. Also, the Delta system is truly amazing. The services provided by this system give benefits to the communities, to species, to the habitats. It's very commendable that there are dual goals for the Delta, and it's constructive and appropriate that an adaptive management approach has been adopted to work toward achieving those goals for the Delta. However, there are challenges of serving on the Delta ISB. The stresses to the environment and the social systems are large and growing, demanding coordinated and integrated responses that are often slow to materialize. Adaptive management cannot be achieved without a holistic approach, yet, because responsibilities and agencies are siloed, adaptive management is often being addressed in a piecemeal manner. Furthermore, some issues are being monitored rather than proactively addressed. For example, more work could be done on early detection and rapid response or forecasting invasive species before it arrives in the Delta. And finally, the combination of COVID and other restrictions limited my ability to become engaged in the field and learn more about this complex and challenging system. Not having worked in California ever before, considering CEQA was a new experience for me. Now, while CEQA provides environmental protection to be part of all decision-making process for every California state and local agency, it does bring challenges. Applying the CEQA criteria produces assessments that are not always sufficient for determining interactions among environmental and social factors. For example, CEQA does not require assessment of the effects of climate change. While CEQA compels consideration of socioeconomic effects, if a project causes physical changes to the environment, its separation of people from the environment is inconsistent with current definitions of ecosystems that include people. CEQA criteria also often summarize effects over large areas, but local impacts are often critical to consider. Furthermore, the ISB review of the 157 monitoring activities found that monitoring required under regulation did not always align well with management needs. While CEQA is one of the most advanced environmental laws in the United States, it still would benefit from reform to make it easier to understand and apply and to be less restrictive. Despite these challenges, or maybe because of them, I found serving on the ISB to be very rewarding. It was a great pleasure to learn about the Delta remarkable system, to gain knowledge from my colleagues on the ISB, to work with others to provide oversight on the scientific enterprises affecting some of the most difficult problems that are being faced by our planet. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you and wish you the best in this challenging effort moving forward.
Thank you so much, Virginia. That was a mouthful. That was definitely something that we will think about for a while. I'll hand the word over to Bob, and then we will all chime in, I think. Bob, do you want to?
Sure. Thank you, Inga. Well, I'm going to be much shorter in terms of my remarks. Oh, there's so much to say, but I'm going to be short. First of all, it was a great honor serving on the board. I appreciated it very much, and I enjoyed it very much over the years. There were certainly challenges, and I'll get to one challenge in a moment. But I think also in turn, I've been thinking about it, or I was thinking about it a lot in terms of my career. You know, I've been an active scientist now on various programs around the world for well over half a century. And I emphasize well over half a century. You know, I've been active in this. I think there comes a time in certainly in my career where you think about, okay, what can I contribute? And am I keeping up with all the new advances that are going on? And can I keep up with my colleagues? And I think, at least for me, I started to realize that it was time to start kind of stepping back a little bit. That I simply couldn't do all the things that I could have done, say, 10 years ago. And so that was a big part of my decision to decide to step down now, not to step away completely, but to begin to step back somewhat. And, I truly enjoyed my time with you all. But I think now that time is going to wind down over the next year or two. And in terms of reflections on the Delta, first and foremost that came to my mind was just the dedication and knowledge of the staff and their willingness to share their knowledge and to bring along folks like myself and bring me up to speed and challenge me to think deeper about things and to inform me, in nice ways, when I was off base and to encourage me when I was actually, saying something that had some impact and so forth. And anyway, I really appreciate that from the staff. And I also appreciated, being able to meet all the various scientists and members of the public in the Delta. They are so knowledgeable about what's going on. It almost took my breath away at times at the insights that they could come up with. And I can't tell you how much that meant to me that they were willing to share those things in a public forum. And, and I think it really shows their level of dedication to the Delta. And finally, I want to express my appreciation to all of you. I've always believed that we're never too old to learn. In fact, we should be lifelong learners. And each and every one of you taught me something, things that I was never aware of before. But believe it or not, I did listen to everything you had to say, and I took it to heart. And I'm kind of walking away now as a much better person and as a scientist because of all of your comments and your insights into things. And anyway, I deeply appreciate that I now have a much better understanding, not only of your fields, but of how it can be applied to the Delta. And then a final word, coming back to use a term that Virginia just brought up, was challenges. There are so many challenges out there facing the Delta. But I think it comes down to one phrase, and that is teamwork. And I don't think that we really do enough to develop an integrative team. The team, whether it's at the board level or at a larger level of the Delta, to really think about how you develop teams that are effective, that get things done. And get things done in a timely manner. I think that's the biggest challenge. The world is changing so quickly around us, and yet we are moving at glacial speeds, in my opinion. And we need to be able to move faster. And the only way to do that, I think, or one of the ways to do it, is to really understand how teams work and how teams can be effective, because we simply can't do it as individuals. And so I see that as the greatest challenge out there going forward right now, is because you've got the knowledge, you've got the data, you've got the people, you've got the passion, the dedication, you've got all those good things, but you don't have a team. And until we all get there, I think we're going to stumble a lot. So but anyway, bottom line is I had a great time, and I look forward to seeing you. I will be kind of a non-voting member of the board for at least a little while. And anyway, I hope to continue to learn from each and every one of you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you both so much. And all I want to say is that you will be sorely missed, for sure, because your contributions have been instrumental, and the board will continue to benefit from what you have done from your work on the board, I am quite sure. So we hope to see you around, let's put it that way, occasionally at least. And yeah, so all there is for me is to wish you the best, and all I can say is I hope to see you again. So I have a lot of raised hands now. Lisa.
Well, thanks. I hadn't meant to go first, but with just people were slowly weighing in, so I thought I'd just jump in. I feel like I'm going to say something that we all feel we're going to miss both of you tremendously, not just because of the expertise you bring, but I think you both are really good at poking us to think a little differently. And you've both played a critical role in that regard. Virginia, I think you often cause us to zoom out a bit. And don't just get too narrow and thinking of this one little system. Remember, there's a whole landscape being affected and affecting this site, and I've really appreciated that. And then Bob, I think your contribution is more along the lines of, is this really getting us where we want to get to? Have you really included what we need to answer the critical questions? And I think both of those pokes were so valuable on almost every occasion, of course. And yeah, and I appreciate, of course, your deep expertise, both of you in your fields, and hope we can, probably call on you from time to time to keep poking us. So thank you so much.
Obi.
Yeah, I think I would like to echo what Lisa said. She characterized both of them very well. I think what their contribution have been for the board. I'm not going to talk about them, but I do want to talk about this friendship that we create over a short period of time in the board. I feel like it's like going to a doctor and your doctor retires. So you establish this camaraderie. And what I remember with Bob is like all the stories of where he had been around the world and things he has done. And I'm going to miss all of them, I think. And particularly for Virginia, that software project she did with the student, that it was very amazing. So besides missing all the expertise in the board, I am going to miss all those lunchtime conversations of what you had done in the past, or maybe you're doing in the future. So I hope you both will visit us sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, Obi. Tanya.
Well, I'll just echo, of course, what Lisa and Obi said. I totally agree. It's been a pleasure to have you both on the board and to learn from you, and also to have you play those important roles that Lisa pointed out. And I think with both of you, one of the things I really appreciated is your ability to think in terms of a system with the Delta, and to embrace not just your own depth of disciplinary knowledge, but to embrace all of the disciplines that we represent, and to be able to have really deep and meaningful conversations with us about how we think about this system as a system. And I will forever be thinking about Virginia whenever we see a conceptual model, and we'll continue to try to carry Virginia's torch every once in a while and remind us, hey, we need to really understand what those boundaries of whatever piece of the system we're talking about is. And Bob, as Lisa said, I really appreciate your ability to often push us and nudge us in the right direction, and to remind us when we might be going astray. So please check in and show up for the occasional meeting, so that you can remind us if we're going astray. Thank you both.
Anna. Oh,
I lowered my hand instead of unmuting myself.
oh,
So needless to say, I agree with everything that's been said. And the one thing I'll add is, one of the things that I appreciate and enjoy most about being on this board is that we do come from very different backgrounds in terms of our scientific expertise. And what that means is that we often really genuinely and deeply disagree with each other's perspectives. And one of the things that I really, really value is the ability to have those disagreements and discuss them in a way that ultimately not only leads to better recommendations and better outcomes, but that gets us to actually respect each other's perspectives more and broaden our views on certain areas of science. And I can certainly think of specific situations in which I have genuinely disagreed with Virginia and with Bob on certain things, but that has helped me reframe how I think about things, and I hope the same is true for them. And so I have really enjoyed working with both of you, interacting with both of you, and I feel that I have learned a great deal, and that you have not just broadened my own perspectives, but I really think that having a group that is deeply functional so that we can have those disagreements makes us more effective as a board. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. And I'm a little bit envious that you all get to meet again in September and have a toast on the retirement from the board. But all the best. I want to wish you all the best. Yeah. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
There are none. Okay, we'll move on then. We're almost done. Are there any public comments for matters that are not on the agenda, Edmund?
There are
I saw
none.
that Lisamarie, oh, sorry, Lisamarie had her hand up a second ago.
Oh,
I only had my hand up because I didn't want to interrupt the board speaking out, and I guess it's ultimately a public comment, but I just had to call out Virginia and Bob. You were, from my ecological training as grad student, you guys were just instrumental in my learning of succession and keystone species and, all of this work. And so what's really fun for me to see is you as role models in terms of bringing science to the table, but opening, just as everybody here already said, showing the connections and showing the bigger perspectives and being open to different perspectives in your own thinking. So you just set a real high bar to me. Again, it's people, I know your work so well, at least I think I do. And now I see what you're doing now. And it was just an incredible experience to be able to work with you. So thank you.
thank you so much, Lisamarie, and I apologize, I didn't see your hand. All right. I'll make sure I have not overlooked anybody else. So are there any public comments for matters not on the agenda, Edmund?
No public comments not on the agenda.
Okay, so that's then all that's left is a preview of what's coming on the next few meetings, and I'll hand over to Edmund for that.
Yes, so our next meeting is in person from September 16th to 17th. It will be the Climate Symposium. This will also be the start of our 3 new ISB members. Following that will be a virtual meeting in October. And what we have lined up there is a council chair and EO report, and then the status update on current reviews. Currently, we have November as being virtual and December as being in person, but we might rearrange the schedule a little bit. So you might see a poll from me later on to see if we can have an earlier in-person meeting date in November to take advantage of introducing and onboarding new board members. In terms of follow-up items, during the Delta Lead Scientist report, there was interest in getting the letters from the Healthy Rivers and Landscape Science Plan Review. So we'll go ahead and recirculate those public memos. And then OBE also had an interest in the notes and products of the collaboratory, and then Lisamarie will follow up on that specific request. During the Delta ISB Teachers Report, Inga mentioned that the recruitment process for an ISB postdoc is now underway. A flyer is part of your meeting package, so please help us circulate that widely. And then lastly, we got a lot of great status updates at this meeting, and then the review leads will be continuing to make progress on that review, on those reviews. Specifically for the climate symposium, we'll take consideration the feedback received today, such as considering climate mitigation, and see what we can do about reframing some of the panelists' questions to maybe get at that. But the leads will consider the comments from today and help finalize the agenda. And on that note, I'll also, since I have the floor, I also want to take this time to thank Bob Nyman and Virginia Dale. On behalf of the staff support team, we really enjoyed working with you, and we'll be in touch over the next few days to help wrap up the loose ends that you're working on. And then today, during the Delta Week Scientist Report, we learned all about how some of the reviews that you helped lead, like monitoring food webs, is influencing programmatic changes in the Delta or funded research. And all of that was done unintentionally. It just happened that way. But thank you so much to both of you. And this wraps up my follow-up items report. And there are no public comments.
No public comments. All right. Well, with that, I adjourn the meeting and wish you a good rest of your day. Thank you.
And Inga, enjoy your trip to Europe.
Oh, I am there.
Oh, you're already there. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.